One of the most unsettling realities of human relationships is how often we secretly crave the very things that destroy us, and the more fragile we become with someone, the more intensely they seem to want us. Beneath this paradox lies a deeply ingrained psychological pattern where vulnerability is not a weakness, but a calculated move to regain power and control. We've all seen it in our own lives or someone else's. The moment when a person who's been hurt or betrayed reveals a vulnerable side, only to wield it like a sword, manipulating and reeling others in with its emotional weight. Today, we're going to dissect this complex dance of insecurity and attraction, exploring the unspoken dynamics that govern how we connect and sabotage ourselves in relationships. Here are 6 insightful spoken sentences for the section, The Psychology of Fear and Insecurity, the Dark Side of Vulnerability. When we're in the grip of fear and insecurity, our minds become expert manipulators, reconfiguring vulnerability as a survival strategy to reassert control over ourselves and others. People will expose their darkest corners, often under the guise of self-discovery, but the real motive is to elicit a reaction that validates their existence, their worth, and their emotional state. Insecure individuals often wield vulnerability like a shield, protecting their ego from the perceived threats of rejection, abandonment, or insignificance. But beneath the facade of openness lies a desperate attempt to grasp power and control. You see, when we reveal our vulnerabilities, we may appear more authentic, but in truth, we're carefully curating a persona designed to elicit the response we crave, the one that will soothe our fears, ease our anxieties, and reinforce our fragile sense of self. Behind masks of vulnerability lies a calculated performance, a deliberate invitation to be perceived in a certain way, often with a hidden agenda to manipulate, to influence, or to exploit the emotions of others for personal gain. By embracing the illusion of vulnerability as a strength, we inadvertently reinforce our deepest insecurities, creating a perverse cycle of self-deception and emotional dependency, where authentic connection gives way to manipulation and control. The irony of vulnerability is that when people use it to manipulate others, they often do so because they are desperate for a sense of control in their insecurities, which they've carefully crafted as a mask to hide the truth of their own powerlessness. By exploiting the vulnerabilities of others, we may regain a fleeting sense of control over our own lives, but we ultimately lose the one thing we're seeking: genuine connection and intimacy. What drives people to use their own vulnerability as a tool for manipulation, rather than authentic self-expression, is the insatiable need for validation and the crippling fear of rejection. The self-deception comes when individuals believe that the power they gain from manipulating others can compensate for the void within themselves, when really, it only serves to further exacerbate their feelings of inadequacy. In a desperate bid to alleviate these insecurities, people will often project their own fears and desires onto others, thereby exerting control over their partner's emotions, thoughts, and actions. Through this cycle of manipulation and control, individuals not only perpetuate a false sense of power but also create a prison of their own making, one built upon a foundation of self-deception, fear, and the insatiable craving for validation. When people showcase their vulnerability, they are often not seeking genuine connection, but rather a desperate attempt to regain power and control through the validation they receive from others. Insecurity is the perfect catalyst for manipulation, as it allows individuals to exploit their own vulnerabilities, turning them into a tool for emotional extortion. At first glance, it may seem like we're attracted to those who are vulnerable, but in reality, we're drawn to the sense of control we think it gives us over someone else's emotions. Behind every charismatic facade lies a complex web of insecurities and fears, which are skillfully masked by a carefully crafted narrative of vulnerability. As human beings, we crave attention and validation, but some people take it too far, using vulnerability as a means of manipulating others into providing the emotional support they can't satisfy within themselves. The ego's need for validation is so profound that people will sometimes sacrifice their emotional well-being and even their own agency, simply to feed their desperate desire for recognition and acceptance. When we try to understand the underlying dynamics of emotionally charged relationships, it's essential to confront the fact that insecurity is often a catalyst for attraction, rather than a genuine expression of vulnerability. Insecurity is not a weakness, but a strategic attempt to reassert control and regain a sense of influence in relationships, often by manipulating the emotions of others to validate one's own sense of self-worth. People often claim to value vulnerability when in reality they are exploiting it as a means to elicit the emotional response they crave, to momentarily alleviate their own feelings of inadequacy and anxiety. The desire for validation is often a thinly veiled attempt to assert dominance, with the person doing the vulnerabilizing seeking a sense of power and control through their partner's emotional submission. In a misguided attempt to feel secure, people may inadvertently cultivate self-deception, convincing themselves that their partner's emotional turmoil is a genuine testament to their love and commitment, rather than a calculated ploy to manipulate their desires and needs. The irony is that the more we try to regain power through emotional manipulation, the more we inadvertently undermine the very sense of trust and intimacy we desperately seek in our relationships. When a manipulator targets someone with vulnerability, it's not about helping them heal, but about exploiting their emotional resources to feed their own ego and sense of control. The moment we surrender to the need for validation from another person, we're essentially inviting them to dictate our self-worth, creating a vicious cycle of dependence that manipulators thrive on. Insecure people often use vulnerability as a shield to deflect genuine intimacy, because the risk of being truly seen and understood is unbearable to their fragile sense of self. Manipulators prey on the deep-seated fear of abandonment in their targets, using guilt and self-blame to keep them trapped in a web of emotional obligation and codependency. The irony is that the people who use manipulation as a coping mechanism are often those who feel the most powerless in their own lives, and in desperation, they turn to controlling others as a way to regain a semblance of power and control. We deceive ourselves when we think we're in love with someone's imperfections, when in reality, we're often hooked on the drama and emotional turbulence that comes with being in a relationship with someone who uses manipulation as a tool to maintain their grip on us. The manipulation of vulnerability in relationships is a subtle yet insidious dynamic that affects us all. If you've noticed this pattern in your own life, take a moment to reflect on how it's impacted your experiences and emotions. Thank you for watching. Hit like, share your observations in the comments, and consider subscribing for more insightful explorations of human psychology.